Bonsoir à toutes et à tous.
Good evening to one and all. Good evening, President Zelensky.
Vous êtes ici,
So you are here, Mr. President, in Paris to attend tomorrow's Summit for Peace and Security in Ukraine. 31 countries present. First, perhaps a word before we start our interview on your presence here in France, along what is now going to be called the Coalition of the Willing.
Thank you for your invitation. Good evening to everyone. Good evening, France. First and foremost, I'd like to thank President Macron for inviting. Today, we had a bilateral important meeting preparing for tomorrow's summit. As you quite rightly put it, there will be 30 people, friends and partners. I believe in this. And indeed, a daily support is very important. Emmanuel and I discussed our bilateral program today, supporting Ukraine today, tomorrow. As for the security guarantees, we're going to discuss the security guarantees for Ukraine after a fair and long-lasting peace. We do believe in this. Our country is proud of our partners, undoubtedly is proud of our resilient army, but we also are fighting. We're all fighting for our independence. We want peace very much, and we believe tomorrow's meeting will bring us closer to that.
And we'll come back onto that in particular as concerns security guarantees. Now, you'll be addressing more than 50 countries tonight, thanks to the European Broadcasting Union, and we're going to be broadcasting in English and in French. Tonight with me I have Jesse Wellner from ARD, Jeremy Bowen from BBC News, and Joaquin Clementi from Estonian Public Broadcasting. And my very first question for you, Mr. President, is that we know about the negotiations in Riyadh and that you accepted to a cessation of hostilities in the Black Sea. Is this going in the right direction for Ukraine, and is it a good deal for Ukraine?
Thank you. Thank you to all countries who've been supporting us. It's very important that today we are talking here with you, and the voice of Ukraine is sounding, and everybody understands Ukraine's position. It's very important for us. I'm very grateful to all channels, to all journalists who undoubtedly inform their societies with regard to support and the truth about what's happening there, how we're fighting for this freedom and truth. As far as the Saudi Arabia negotiations is concerned, we didn't have negotiations with Russia. We had negotiations with the United States of America. And to specify, not because we're afraid, I think it's Russia who's afraid of any dialogue, of any negotiations. We were talking to the United States, and in parallel, the United States were talking to the Russians, and that's how it was going. We were agreeing with the United States, and I also would like to emphasize not just about the ceasefire on the Black Sea, not only about that, not the civilian vessels won't be attacked, but also that, and it's very important, that civilian infrastructure is not going to be hit. The civilian infrastructure, I mean the ports infrastructure, a lot of people work there, because then we had the negotiations, there will be no hits on energy infrastructure, and that's what we agreed on. That was our agenda. There would be no missiles and long-range weapons hitting the energy infrastructure of Ukraine, and Ukraine is not going in response to hit the Russian energy infrastructure. That's very important, and that's also another important thing. Somehow it disappeared from the media landscape, because I feel this is number one why we're going there, and that is getting our Ukrainian kids back. The kids that the Russians have stolen and abducted, and we agreed that the United States would help us to set free our civilians and our POWs. That was our agenda. This is about the correctness of our discussion. I believe our agenda is good and correct. Anything that brings us to the ceasefire, everything that is bringing us to peace without any losses. First, we wanted an unconditional ceasefire, but the Russians didn't want that. They didn't want an unconditional ceasefire, putting forward the conditions. I can talk about it for a long time. Please do stop me. I don't want to take all of your time.
We'll come back to that.
Mr. President, can I ask you, what's the situation on the ground actually like? Is there any sort of ceasefire in effect right now? Are the Russians limiting their attacks in any way? Does Ukraine consider this ceasefire to be active?
Я думаю, що складна історія з
моніторингом
цього. Поки що технічні команди не визначили, яким чином це буде. Хоча брехати не хочу. Сьогодні вночі не було атак на енергетику. Були атаки на іншу цивільну інфраструктуру. Безумовно, це трагедія, що русські все одно атакували, і більше сотні дронів, але ми повинні бути чесними, ударів по енергетиці сьогодні вночі не було. А Україна не відповідала по енергетиці також. Це випадковість або це не випадковість, бо русским ніхто не вірить, ніхто не говорить, що це якась константа, і просто не можна вірити. Тому і треба було домовлятися одразу, щоб не бити по будь-якій інфраструктурі. Легше моніторити. Але ми подивимося, що буде далі. Безумовно, важливо, хто моніторить і хто на себе бере відповідальність. Чекаємо від Сполучених Штатів.
We're waiting for the United States and expecting.
You're making concessions all the time during the last weeks. And Putin demands more and more. So somehow, are you caught in a trap and you can't get out?
Дякую. Для нас дуже було потрібно розблокування допомоги Сполучених Штатів Америки. Для нас дуже важливо обмін розвідданими. Ми пішли одразу і говорили про деталі з американською стороною.
We didn't talk about the details about the United States. We went ahead and supported the unconditional support of ceasefire. And we told the American side, we told them, you will see, the Russians would not agree to that because they'll put forward their preconditions. And the conditions were more public that were put forward by the Russians because it was not what we discussed with the American side. And therefore, we do not really accept any of their conditions. They are an aggressor, and they still put forward their preconditions. That's their style. Their meeting ended. They issued a statement, an official statement, but then later on, additionally, the Russians put forward their statement. We already have been through that. We've been there. We were very careful. We arrived with four issues that I mentioned to you. These were the issues we discussed, and we discussed the details of these issues, and we didn't move beyond these issues so far. This is how it is. But the aid has been unblocked, and I think, in my opinion, this is important. Not everyone knows what intelligence means. I can tell you briefly, without American intelligence data, we can't control the launches of ballistic missiles from the Russian Federation aimed at our people. The ballistics, 100% or 90% of ballistic missiles were hitting civilian infrastructure, energy, schools, universities, churches, you know that. So tens of thousands of missiles, and we don't see when we should raise alarm for the people to go to the shelters. If we don't have this data, we've never had access to that. Our partners gave it to us. This is what I always fought for from the beginning of the war. Give us direct access to that as soon as possible. We didn't have it initially, but we're still grateful. We unblocked it, and that's a success of our team.
Mr. President, I understand fully how much you need that American intelligence, but if we can go back to the conditions that the Kremlin have put on the Black Sea ceasefire, particularly the easing of sanctions. Now, your foreign minister today said that he was very much against that sanctions allow Russian deception. So if you don't agree to sanctions relief, is that the end of it in terms of hopes for a ceasefire? Do you now require the Russians to move before you do anything else?
Дякую за запитання. Передусім, всім треба зрозуміти, що припинення вогню в Чорному морі передусім важливо сьогодні для русских.
important for the Russians today. They don't control, for a long time, they haven't been controlling the corridors in the Black Sea, on the Black Sea, and we're fighting for it, because undoubtedly this is a step towards ending the war. But we control the situation in the Black Sea, and their Black Sea fleet is part of it on the bottom of the sea, or they hid it, and that's what is happening today. They were agreeing and were ready to cease for a ceasefire on terms of energy infrastructure. If it's energy infrastructure and the Black Sea, we're ready for the full ceasefire. So we agree with this ceasefire. They just want to jump into the they tried to jump into controlling the food corridor.
Yeah, but Mr. President, sorry to interrupt, but if I could just... my question was that the Russians are putting conditions on all of this, and if they put conditions on all of this, how can you make progress?
Look, they put forward the conditions with regard to the sanctions to the Americans. If America is going to stand strong and be strong and not bend to the conditions of the Russians, we stand on our land. We're defending it now. And our resilience, we've shown our resilience to everyone. And now it's very important that our partners would be resilient and strong, at least at the minimum, as we are. Or perhaps
will the Americans stay strong?
I hope so. I hope so. God bless, they will.
Let's talk about...
But we'll see.
Parlons justement des Américains.
Let's talk about the Americans, because the alliance seems to have been harder to swallow, and Witkoff seems to be saying that Trump is someone who really wants peace, and would it be fair to say that the White House, in your opinion, has been peddling Kremlin propaganda?
Я вважаю, що
Witkoff
дуже часто цитує
very frequently quotes
кремлівські
the
наративи.
Kremlin
Я з вами
narratives. I agree with
погоджуюсь.
you.
Я вважаю,
I
що
believe
це не наблизить нас
this
до
won't bring
миру.
us closer to
І
peace.
я вважаю, що
And I
це,
believe
на жаль,
that
послабить
unfortunately that
тиск
would weaken
американців на
the
Російську
pressure of
Федерацію.
Americans
Ми
applied to the
можемо
Russian Federation.
тільки
We can
своїми
only
діями виправляти
actions,
це інформаційне поле.
we can correct this
Ми
information
намагаємося це робити.
field through our actions. We're trying to do this. I spoke with President Trump more than once, and we have been trying to exchange real, truthful information at the intelligence services level, because this is very, that's interfering, because we are fighting Putin, and we don't want him to have any assistance. We are fighting the country that has less dignity and more territory, and it's difficult for us. We don't. And I've always said to President Trump, we want the Americans to be on our side. And even if America today has chosen the taxes to be in the middle means in the middle, but not closer to the Kremlin. And that's important.
And when he says Putin wants peace, do you think that that's a mistake, that they're falling for it?
America,
by and large, the people have always supported us, and I'm very grateful to them indeed. They've always supported us. The bipartisan support has been there, and therefore the assistance was flowing. I can't be ungrateful to the United States for everything they've done for us, but they today very often, I believe, unfortunately, are under the influence of Russian narratives. And we can't agree to these narratives. But we are fighting for ourselves, and we will be fighting these narratives whenever they are. We just don't have any other choice. We are fighting for our independence and for our existence. We can only open up more truth. We should show by our examples that they were fighting on the battlefield. We are not surrounded, as Witkov said, that Ukrainians have been surrounded in the Kursk region. That is only in order to soften the situation, that allegedly we are there, but we are surrounded. No, we are in Kursk. We have been in Kursk as long as we need. We have never been surrounded. There are no evidences of there's no evidence of that. And on the contrary, when we're in the Kursk region, we captured 1,000 Russian POWs and we exchanged them for our Ukrainian POWs, and that's the truth.
Can I ask you about the reliability of the United States under Donald Trump as an ally? He for a brief period, he cut off military aid and intelligence support. You've said yourself a few minutes ago that the Americans have been swallowing Russian narratives. Can you trust them to support you in the way that you want and need? Or is it the case that actually the people, your better friends, are here and gathering here? And clearly they would not be gathering here if they trusted America.
You know, when you count the days of this war and the number of people that you've lost, and you know exactly how many, then you don't have any sentiments with regard to the actions of this or that state. There's just an approach about how you can go through this with dignity, survive, and defeat the evil that is sitting in the Kremlin. At the end of the day, Ukraine will win, and they will lose everything. You'll see that. I'm convinced of that. You will see that. It's just the issue, unfortunately, of time. And therefore, when Patriot systems were provided by the United States, and they produced the shells and missiles for that. And I'm very grateful to Germany. They also gave them to us. But without what America would say, okay, go ahead, give it to them. Nobody would give it to us and would have not given it to us. And therefore, because our protection of our civilians, children and women, it depends on whether the President of the United States blocks it or not, or doesn't, or not, then I believe that you must understand me. We believe that the Americans will be our reliable partners, which they are today. He's unblocked the aid. I would like to believe that this is not a coincidence, but he did it because he understands the threats that we're facing.
And you gave him something. You gave him deals and you gave him concessions.
I did. What did we do? What did we give him?
You agreed to an unconditional ceasefire when you said that there had to be security guarantees. You agreed to talk about the minerals agreement.
Well, look. We're talking about the ceasefire, not because, how should I say that? It's because it's an issue of dealings or bargaining. I'll tell you why I'm doing this. I'm doing this because there's the Middle East there, which has always told me that Ukraine doesn't want the end of the war. Putin is ready for peace. The Russian propaganda worked there very well. And I showed through these steps that we are prepared for the ceasefire. But you will see that Putin is not ready. Do you know that there were several contacts with the Middle East, with the countries of the Global South after that, that these countries hadn't spoken with us before that because they were trying to play a balancing act between the us and the Russians, because they were trying to flirt with the Russians because of the economic relations. So I believe today, correct diplomatic steps are necessary, and that's what I'm doing. That's number one. Number two, I really needed to unblock the aid. And I unblocked it. I have unblocked it. And I would like now that Putin, if he undoubtedly, unconditionally agrees to the ceasefire. So if he disagrees with unconditional ceasefire, I would like President Trump to extend and enhance this sanction on Putin, pressing him.
If there's one thing we know about Donald Trump, he said as much, he wants a quick end. He wants to stop the killing as soon as possible. I think this is something that you want, that Europeans want as well. But the people in my country and our neighboring countries are worried. We have historical examples of the big powers selling us out, making deals over our heads, deciding our freedoms and independence without our knowledge. A lot of people are worried that this is what's happening again. Is it?
Well, let's just believe it's not so. At least we have enough experience that you've referred to quite justifiably, the historic experience, how it may or can happen, how it happens. And I don't want to say that I'm the most experienced president, but what the fact that I'm the war president and I've already met with very different partners of ours, with various leaders, and I understand what they're ready for and prepared for. So I believe and I trust that this experience is sufficient for us to understand in a timely manner where there's partnership and support, or where there is a betrayal, inevitable betrayal, as they say.
Can I just ask, will you stand for the concerns of Eastern Europe, countries such as Estonia, Poland as well, when talking with the US, when you're in these negotiations as well? The Europeans have had a hard time getting to the table. Is Ukraine speaking for the Europeans as well?
Ukraine definitely, by defending itself, is defending Europe, undoubtedly. That was one of the points that we discussed with President Trump personally, and with all the players in his team and the congressmen. And I believe the agreement, when we will approach, when we come to it, about the end of the war, that definitely Europe should be around the table. I know about all the risks that the European countries face, those who were part of the Soviet Union formerly, or where the Soviet army was present on the territory or in the political sphere. So when they had the Soviet army and the Soviet troops there stationed in those countries. So I know what Putin wants. I believe we clearly understand what they're about. Unfortunately, not all partners know exactly what it's all about. But look, on the other hand, look at the entire Europe. Before the large-scale war, everything had been different. Everybody had been skeptical about our views. Everybody had believed that the Russians didn't believe what the Russians were after. The return to the empire, for the return to their influence of the Soviet Union type influence, and return to the Soviet Union. So we believe that we'll be able to convince other partners, and undoubtedly Europe will be around the table about the end of this war, because the security guarantees for Ukraine, security guarantees for all the countries you were mentioning, your countries undoubtedly so.
And I think Jesse has a question.
If you say the US is under influence of Russian narratives, let me put it into a simple question. How do you want to convince Trump that Putin cannot be trusted? How do you want to manage it?
Це дуже непросто. Я маю на увазі щодо наративів. Зараз питання не в президенті Трампі або іншому лідері. Питання в тому, що дезінформація
Russian disinformation
як ми сьогодні вже
говорили, в глобальному півдні сильно, на африканському континенті. Вона була, безумовно, дуже сильно розповсюджена і в Європі, але Європа, через ця війна дуже близько, десь є кордони countries bordering this war. Europe responded earlier, both with sanctions and closing down media outlets from Russia and by financing their channels. So Europe reacted quicker than countries more remote vis-à-vis Europe. So therefore, we have to fight this disinformation. But look, between us, I think President Trump doesn't have to be convinced what Putin is doing today. He's got enough services, I believe.
Russian narratives.
He's got enough services, intelligence services, who could show him the real picture, where the Russian narratives are spreading. If he wants, and his surrounding would want to see that and to use this information, they can. They have it all on behalf of our country, on behalf of Ukraine. We always share with our European colleagues and with the United States of America. We shared the fakes, the surnames, everything. We told them who should be sanctions, look where they keep their money, look how they impact the business, what they do, how they buy and buy our people and corrupt them.
One more question. Which connection is better?
З Трампом треба, щоб лідери Європи
leaders of Europe should communicate and talk to Trump. It is necessary that this circle
навколо Трампа коло було ширше, ніж те, яке сьогодні є. На мою думку, це моя порада.
It's very important that the connection between Trump and Putin or between Trump and you, which one is closer? In the end.
Хто ближче?
Who's closer?
Я не знаю. Мені складно сказати.
It's difficult for me to say.
Мені дійсно складно сказати. Я не знаю, які у нього реально, які у нього стосунки і відносини. Я не знаю, що у них було розмов. Я б так сказав, у мене не настільки близькі відносини з Трампом, щоб розуміти, наскільки у Трампа з Путіним близькі.
To which extent the relations of Trump with Putin are close.
Nous allons parler des garanties de sécurité, qui est un enjeu important de la réunion de demain avec
security guarantees, which is a big issue for tomorrow's meeting.
I want to come back to what you said, that you know what Vladimir Putin wants. Can you describe to the whole of Europe, what does he want? And in terms of security guarantees, we need to deter Russia. And I want to ask you, what is Putin, or who is Putin actually afraid of?
A lot of questions. Let me just give a second. I have to note them down. Who is Putin afraid of? Let me start with this. Putin is only afraid of his society. The destabilization of his society is what he's afraid of. But nobody would be able to impact that. He will impact that. His economy will impact that. The sanctions policy will be impacting that. The fact that he's not controlling all of his territories and defends his territories. There will be a congress of all these factors. Getting back to that again, if all our partners are going to be so strong that to the extent that they are capable of, if they want to demonstrate not just superpowers, but just simply to demonstrate their real capabilities and powers, if they're going to pressure Putin, and there will be a destabilization of society in this country, and he will be afraid of it, and he is afraid of it. The second thing he's afraid of is to lose his power. That's also related to the fact of the stability of his society, but it also depends on his age. He will die soon, and that's a fact, and it will come to an end. And it could come to an end even before he ends his absolutely safe and historically losing life. historically lost life. And he is afraid of being left alone. Of course, at any rate, it hasn't been a success to isolate Putin fully. But at the moment when the political isolation occurred, I believe the global South, with all due respect, they did not isolate him. They continued dealing with him, having contacts with him. I believe by doing so, they helped him, they assisted him, because that would have impacted his society. His society would have seen that he's alone. He's not right, but they saw a number of countries helping him. It's very important now that America would not help him, help Putin to emerge from this global isolation. And I think this is dangerous. This is one of the most dangerous moments. And as far as what Putin wants is concerned, I think he would like to enter the history, and he's probably afraid of death in his life. He'd like to have the same impact that the Soviet Union had. He'd like to bring back the impact on all republics, former republics, now independent countries. But he wants a bit more. Believe me, he wants a bit more, and that undoubtedly can result, God forbid, to a direct confrontation with the West. And that's what you'll hear in the messages of his propaganda and propagandists. If you analyze what these propagandists talk on their television, they all talk about the fact that they have to prepare for the war with the West. Their country has to prepare for the war with the West. They want this because any war is continuing the life of this person, Putin.
You say that he's afraid of his country, that he's afraid of being left out. But is he actually afraid of Europe when it comes to security guarantees? Is Putin afraid of Europe?
He is afraid of the European unity and the unity of the United States. So his main thrust, his main hit is to divide and weaken this region. And I believe in some areas he's succeeded. I believe so. Not always, not quite, thank God, but he's succeeded. Then he is trying to hit the Union, the European Union itself, from within. We can also see that he partly succeeded through the position of Hungary, official Hungary. I'm not talking about the people, not the population, not the public, but I'm talking about their leaders. And I believe this is the fact that Hungary sometimes blocks the sanctions against Russia and blocks the pressure against Russia, and they try to extract certain Russian oligarchs from the sanctions list. That's what's happening now.
Alors nous sommes en duplex ce soir avec
actually in dual location broadcast tonight with YLE, with a journalist from Finland, Antti Kurunen.
Okay. Mr. President, YLE Finland here. It seems that Russia is not going to commit to a real ceasefire. If there, however, eventually will be a real ceasefire, it will probably be very fragile, and Ukraine needs strong security guarantees. What kind of support, concrete support, do you wish to get from the Nordic countries? Is it troops, help to close the sky, air defense, other things?
Thank you.
Найкраща гарантія безпеки для нашої держави це НАТО. Це залежить виключно від Сполучених Штатів Америки. Я думаю, німецька позиція, яка також була проти України в НАТО, вважаю, що вона може змінитись і, скоріш за все, зміниться. Але, безумовно, це залежить від позиції Америки. Не кричить гарантії безпеки для України це НАТО. Уявіть собі, що сьогодні це залежить від США.
Because the pro-Russian position held by Hungary will crumble, and I'm still sure, that Germany's position is now changing. Germany will support Ukraine. I feel it and I know that. And I believe this is the best security guarantee. NATO. But the problem is that the United States of America are not ready for this step. It's the cheapest, the fastest, the most guaranteed step. Definitely not fragile. And definitely, if America will decide that Ukraine could be accepted in NATO, then it could be counted that Trump did in 24 hours what he promised to do in 24 hours. I think this is in his hands. And as far as Northern Europe is concerned, if I may, I would answer that I'm grateful to Finland. And very briefly, what's important, if it's not NATO, what's important is Ukrainian armed forces, strong armed forces. We have it, the funding, air defense, and a brigade, manning the brigade, that are also about 70% or 80% complete with weapons and armored kit. We need to do it, make it 100%. These brigades are a wall standing against the Russians, between the Russians and the civilized world. These are the key things. And the contingents, but I don't have time for it
As
now.
you mentioned, Germany, we hear that the United Kingdom and France are ready to send ground forces to the Ukraine to secure a ceasefire. Do you demand that from Germany as well? We have a new chancellor coming up, new government.
I have very good relations with Chancellor Merz, and I'm very grateful to Olaf, and I believe it's a common atmosphere that we now face, that additional 3 billion have been unblocked for the support for us, and I'd like to thank for that. I'd like to thank the German team for that very much. Thank you very much. Second thing, I think Merz is a decisive person, and if not the deployment of forces, I would like to ask him for Taurus long-range missiles. He knows that I want it very much. I believe this package would help us, and we talked about that, but the decision, of course, is on the German side.
Ground forces with Germany.
With pleasure.
Not yet.
I didn't speak with him. I didn't yet speak with him because he is not officially in office yet. Yes.
So you're longing for it, that he comes into office. Friedrich Merz.
Yes.
Okay, I hear. I understand.
Jeremy.
Yeah. Steve Witkoff, the envoy of President Trump, gave a very illuminating interview the other day. And it seemed to suggest very strongly that the Americans don't take seriously the efforts that the British and the French are doing to try to put together a force to give you some security guarantees. I mean, Witkoff said, he ridiculed it. He said it was a posture, it was a pose, there was simplistic desire to sound like Winston Churchill, but bearing in mind the realities of European military weakness compared to the US, actually, do you think he's right?
Look, Europe, in the course of this war, Europe has strengthened itself significantly, definitely as has undergone the audit of what it had with the view of defense. Now, in Europe, you will see the production will be increasing in Europe very quickly. Europe, from the point of view of weapons and defense and cyber defense, intelligence, I think over the course of 3 and 5 years would be on par with the United States. If everything is going as it's going now, Europe has today, well, yes, today it's less than the United States. Simply the United States are a leader in this direction. But Europe, as it stands today, has everything to be a fairly safe and secure for its people. Europe has discipline, and Europe has no chaos. And I believe this is important. In many countries, I believe, there is a defense case. Believe you us, because we were buying, I'm not going to say from where, we were hauling the weapons and kit from wherever we could. And do you believe me, discipline in Europe is #1. And this discipline will enable Europe to grow from the point of view of defense and production. The fact that Europe is investing money directly into Ukrainian drone production and is opening up for the European Union countries, not only European Union, but also Norway. They are our partners by their opening up all technologies to the European countries, all the technologies that Ukraine obtained through a painful experience. So I wouldn't be hastily driving to conclusions now. I wouldn't drive to hasty conclusions of this guy who is commenting it. He doesn't look like his general. He doesn't look he's a military guy. He doesn't look like military, and he doesn't have that experience. As far as I know, he knows very well how to sell and buy real estate. But that's somewhat different.
Can I ask very quickly? I mean, yes, Europe has done a lot compared to a few years ago, but we often hear messages that are messages of support for Ukraine that are very grand, that are saying as long as it takes. But I've written, I think, 100 times the same message that the European leaders agreed on more support for Ukraine in my news reports. But then if you look into detail, sometimes the money simply is not where the mouth is. Do you think that's an issue for Europe, that actions don't follow words?
That's complicated because, alongside the pluses and disciplines, there's also bureaucracy there. Most likely, bureaucracy slows down any processes, and therefore, of course, would like to receive these frozen assets. And of course, here, the Russians work with some Europeans, unfortunately. We can't receive these Russian assets that have been frozen. We'd like to spend them quickly for our weapons and kit. We also openly said, look, let's take all this money and let's invest them into the production, both in Ukraine and the entire Europe. We're only in favor of it. Let's invest them. Let's cover, let's ensure for all of us that quick steps are made. We have to run, we have to be quick, agile, in order to enhance and strengthen ourselves, to strengthen the defense of Ukraine and Europe. Because if there's a ceasefire in place, in any event, there will be some time to strengthen ourselves, and we have to move fast. So when the Russians see that, and it's one of the security guarantees, if the Russians are going to see that Europe has strengthened itself 2, 3 more times, some countries are capable to strengthen themselves 5 times over, like Germany, for example, they can do it fast. We can see that. So if these countries are strengthening themselves quickly and strengthening each other, the European Union undoubtedly is going to strengthen the security of the entire Europe. There are more guarantees of security, because then later on the Russians would not come back with the war, because they will see who is facing them.
But not all European countries are actually enthusiastic about putting boots on the ground. As you know, in Italy, for example, Giorgia Meloni believes that it's not necessary to send troops. She says that perhaps you just need to continue to enjoy NATO's protective benefits. But what do you think? I mean, you're the one feeling the threat from Moscow when you've entered into a direct conflict. You know what that feels like. So what would you say to those reluctant?
We'll talk all kinds of things. The thing is about the resilience of the United States and the European leaders. The issue is our resilience. Russia tries to veto all European decisions with regard to security. Or Europe would veto all wishes of Putin. The thing is, This is the issue. So it doesn't matter what Russia wants. We have to increase security, strengthen security for our citizens, for us, for entire Europe. Even after the war is over, we have to strengthen our security. We don't have to think about how Kremlin sees that. We have to think about us. Now about Georgia. Georgia, and I spoke with her, Georgia believed that it would be better with NATO. And I agree, NATO is better for us because it's quicker and cheaper. Because there are, this is an institutionalized approach. Everybody understands what needs to be. What needs to happen. And NATO will be strengthened by Ukraine, and there will be a second strongest army, because there's only Turkey in NATO that has 800,000 troops. Ukraine is equal to that. NATO doesn't strengthen Ukraine. Ukraine strengthens NATO. NATO gives security to Ukraine, but Ukraine definitely makes NATO stronger, because if you look at the Russians, if you look at their army, they've got 1.3 million troops, and they're going to increase it to 1.5-1.6 million troops. Without Ukraine, as it stands today, there is no modern, experienced, battle-hardened army in Europe that has the same experience as Russia does. That's the thing. And therefore, Georgia was proposing NATO. But, you know, we're very grateful to Georgia. And the United States, for now, unfortunately, are against for now.
President Zelensky, you've got a tough job. You're leading your country at war. You have political pressure at home and abroad. We all saw President Trump and J.D. Vance giving you a hard time in the White House when you were there. How do you deal with all this personally, on a personal level as a man? And also, how do you think the history books are going to look at you? Will you be the man who saved Ukraine, or will you be the man who tried to save Ukraine but couldn't?
I don't know what history books would write about me, and it's not my purpose and goal. The goal, the thing that I'm one of those who defended Ukraine, together with our people, our army, and all those who have been supporting us. Undoubtedly, I would be defending it, because it's my constitutional duty. To be honest, this is my civic position. The presidency, it's a term-limited thing, but I'm a human being. I was born in Ukraine, I live in Ukraine, and I think I will live my life in my native country. This is my goal, to see my kids walking along the streets without hiding, to be dignified and to be looked at with dignity. So we're all going through this as human beings first and foremost, just human beings with normal values. And I will be doing everything I can till the end of my days to defend Ukrainians as much as I can. But definitely, I'm younger than Putin. You see, my prospects. You can put your stakes on me. I have better stakes.
Thank you very, very much, Volodymyr Zelensky. Thank you to one and all for your time. Now, I think you have a working dinner with Mr. Macron with